Hello, everyone. Welcome to SADS Live. Here we are, Friday, October 14, 2022. This is SADS Live number 102. Greetings to all of you. I'm so glad you could take the time to join us live all around the world, or if you watch this sometime else at your convenience, good to be with you. I'm Mike Ackerman, Director of Mayo Clinic's Winland Smith Rice Genetic Heart Rhythm Clinic and the Winland Smith Rice Sudden Death Genomics Laboratory. I've had the privilege of serving as president of the board of the SADS Foundation, the Sudden Arrhythmia Death Syndrome Foundation, alongside our CEO, Alice Laura, for many years now, 15, 16. And here we are again. I love this time. We devote probably every other one to your questions, and we'll see what questions are coming in. Right after this, I am heading east to go see our two granddaughters. Juniper is 44 days old today. So my wife and I are looking forward to that visit. A lot in the news, isn't there? I think before we see what questions you have, I'll share with you something that I got to do this week, where I went to University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia, beautiful. And I was invited to be the 22nd Dr. Richard Crampton invited lecturer in his honor. He's 91, Dr. Crampton. He was chief of cardiology there a long time, but a fun fact that many people do not know or do not remember or forgot is that Dr. Crampton is one of the co-founders of the International Long QT Syndrome Registry. I bet you didn't know that, because everybody thinks of the registry being founded by the late Arthur Moss and the very present and great Peter Schwartz from Italy. But there is the third, and that third was Dr. Richard Crampton. So we took a stroll down memory lane Wednesday evening after my lecture and at the dinner of those early times of that long QT registry. And boy, he looked great. 91, thriving, healthy, and was very excited about the lecture that I got to give there to their division of cardiology on Wednesday. So that was a highlight of the week. Now, I know a lot of you have been asking, and I don't know if it's spreading like wildfire, about the epidemic, no, not COVID-19 pandemic, but the epidemic of sudden deaths while video gaming, war games, electronic games, the things that our kids are doing down in the basement on their electronic gaming device. And now we have to add, number one, there's too much gaming going on. It's consuming way too much time. It is not that productive. It's causing too much sedentary living and other issues that the American Academy of Pediatrics have encouraged us as parents to try to limit the amount of electronic gaming that our children, adolescents, young adults are doing. Now you add to it yesterday's issue, or 2 days ago, in Heart Rhythm, one of our leading heart rhythm journals. It's called the Heart Rhythm Journal from the Heart Rhythm Society, that there are sudden deaths, sudden cardiac deaths from electronic gaming. That got picked up by social media, and I think it's caused a lot of angst and anxiety in our SADS Foundation family community. And I want you to know, get rid of it. The anxiety is not necessary that it generated. The angst is not necessary. Don't have your kids do gaming for other reasons. It's not that good for you. But the death signal, the danger signal, was blown way out of proportion by the various media outlets. A nice paper. I liked it. It's not new. Many of us have documented gaming as the setting in which the Sentinel event, the first event, occurred that brought family to clinical attention, that led to diagnosis of one of these genetic heart rhythm conditions, long QT syndrome or CPVT, probably the two most common ones implicated in electronic gaming triggered syncope or worse. So we've all seen this for a long time and have known about it and talked to our patients about it. But it was gathered together, multi-center, They put together their numerator, meaning the cases that they could remember or find from down under. Good friend of mine, Jonathan Skinner, New Zealand, author of the paper, over there, up there in Canada, from dear friend Shu Sanatani and others, and they put together 22 such cases, and they reported that. Nice paper, I liked it. Full disclosure, I didn't review it. And what we saw is that they even reported that there were 4 deaths, and they also reported that some of the gaming events occurred after diagnosis and after treatment. And that has caused a lot of fear and worry, anxiety, as I said, but fear no more. It is incredibly uncommon. We're examining, as we speak, our 20-plus year experience of all families coming from all over the globe with all types of genetic heart conditions to the Windland Smith Rice Genetic Heart Rhythm Clinic for the past 20-plus years, to show you just how many had gaming as the portal of entry for their first spell. Not very many. Give you the spoiler alert. And then those after diagnosis and after good treatments were put in place. How many had a post-diagnosis, after treatment, breakthrough cardiac event while gaming, electronic gaming? Spoiler alert, not very many. So when we have you treated really, really well, gaming is like sports, like athletics, like any adrenaline generating activity. And I'm not worried about it. Now, should they be downstairs playing Minecraft and war games and all of this? Restrict that for all kinds of other reasons. But don't be on pins and needles that the electronic gaming is going to trigger their tragedy. Highly, highly unlikely. So stop the gaming for other reasons, but don't have fear about this potential concern about gaming doing a naughty, a nasty, and awful to our kids who have a SADS condition. And so this is, and somebody's asking gaming, that's what I mean, video games, electronic games, downstairs. I didn't want to say because I don't even know what the latest platform is. Xbox, is there Xbox or PlayStation, or what was Pac-Man on? That dates me, right? So that type of gaming. Well, let's get to your questions. Hopefully that settles the issue a bit. Hopefully it puts it in context, and we'll put it in more definitive context when our analysis of over 2,000 to 3,000 patients with genetic heart diseases are completed. Aha, Carla, thank you. Atari, I remember that. I had one of those. So let's see. What do you have? Going back to the top of the list, questions are coming in, and greetings to you all. And Cheryl gave a y'all, so I think Cheryl must be down south. I don't remember, but welcome. Andrew's asking, oh boy, that was clever, Andrew. A very tight question, but then he says, what are the top 5 questions a patient had asked their EP after being recently diagnosed with Brugada on their follow-up visit? Great question. I think the questions that you should ask, you've been diagnosed with Brugada, and now you're settling into it, and in follow-up, you should ask, what's my forecast? What's my risk category? Do you have me slotted at low risk, medium risk, high risk? And what can I do to make my risk lower? Number 2, what things do I need to avoid? Very important things to avoid. You need to avoid certain prescriptions that can be Brugada aggravating, agitating. www.brugadadrugs.org. Can I drink alcohol? Asked. Answer, yes, but in moderation. Drunk is dangerous in all situations. A little alcohol will not bother your Brugada. Can I go into a sauna, hot tub, do hot yoga? Yes. Already I've given you the answer if that's something you wanted to do, but don't stay in there very long. Don't want your core body temperature going much above 102 Fahrenheit, because that can be Brugada agitating. Marijuana is illegal in a lot of places. That's a whole nother topic. Can I do marijuana? No, you can't. I already gave you the answer. Marijuana is potentially Brugada dangerous. The CBD oils, no problem. So anyway, that's some of the questions you can ask, but make sure you have a good feel of what's your risk category that they're viewing you as, and why do they have you in a low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And then Andrew, Andrew's getting, I'm going to give you a bonus. So we usually don't allow two, but you are a fast finger. So, and I don't recognize your name. So I think you may be relatively new to our SADS online. So it's great having you, Andrew. And he's asking, what are the data suggesting currently of how uncommon Brugada is known to be in living patients in the United States? Really good question. We don't have great data to confidently tell us how common or uncommon are these genetic heart conditions. The one we probably have the best epidemiologic data on the heart muscle side is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or HCM, where it's probably 1 in 500 individuals. On the heart rhythm side, the channelopathies, where Brugada belongs in part, is long QT syndrome, where work from Dr. Peter Schwartz and others, pretty solid number, that 1 in 2,000 persons in the United States, in Europe, in anywhere, have long QT syndrome. Most of us believe that that's actually going to be an underestimate, that is probably closer to 1 in 1,000 individuals have long QT syndrome. Brugada syndrome don't have great numbers at all. I would say most of us, if asked, would put Brugada syndrome in the 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 10,000 person territory. I love it. Good question. Here's an anonymous question. Clinically diagnosed with long QT, genetically told has a VUS, that's variant of uncertain significance. We've talked about the VUS dilemma, problem, purgatory, on KCNE1 gene, and unable to tolerate beta blockers, so cardiologist is leaving it untreated with yearly follow-up. QTC is almost always over 500. Is this appropriate treatment? A lot of details there. Great question, great insight. But I would say I don't care about the KCNE1 variant, whether it is truly uncertain or whether it is truly your LQT5 causative variant, because that's what true mutations in that particular gene cause. What I care more about is that you're telling me that the QTC is consistently and persistently above 500 milliseconds at rest. If we don't have the reason why it's out there, and we don't have reversible reasons for it being past the 500 line, non-treatment, no treatment is not acceptable. The risk is too high. The forecast for the category is unacceptably high. Now, is it spooky? No, it's not. We're still probably 1, 2, 3% chance per year. So that's really low from that macro perspective. But relative to other long QT risk categories, that's starting to get on the high side. And we have always said that anybody with a QTC above 500, that stays above 500, and I cannot make it go below 500 by fixing something, removing something, reversing something, that person, 1, needs genetic testing, and 2, needs treatment. We must do a better job of respecting the 500 line. Just had a wonderful woman, young woman, who's carried a QTC at rest over 500 milliseconds at rest for 10, 12 years on regular ECGs. No attention given to it, no precautionary measures, no genetic testing. Not good. With that documented trail of abnormal QTC values above the 500 line, had there been something awful that happened to that person, that is going to be and would be really hard to defend. So Uh, I think you need to be treated. Mary's asking, have there been any changes in the last few years recommending sports or no sports like track in type 1 long QT syndrome in teens? Oh, Mary, great question. You know, or maybe you don't know, that we have been at the forefront of what can I do now that I have these genetic heart conditions. We moved the needle from 20, 30 years ago yesterday of, if in doubt, kick you out and put you on the sideline, shut you down, tell you to stay on the couch, don't get your heart rate up, to what is that sport, that activity for you? Is it O optional? Is it O oxygen? And if it's O towards oxygen, let's figure out how to keep that activity safely in play. And we published our experience over and over and over again, culminating in our latest paper that our team can find and attach, is published in JACC from a now first-year medical student, Katie Tober, on my 20-year experience of enabling, supporting return to play for athletes with all kinds of conditions, mostly long QT syndrome. I have the privilege of following about 800 such athletes in total, about 600 of who have long QT syndrome. And so we have a long 20-year experience. And overall, the risk of cardiac events during sport after diagnosis, after treatment, is super low overall. Overall, it's about a 1.5% chance per year. The risk of death so far is zero. The likelihood of an automatic external defibrillator among my long QT athletes who did not need an ICD has been an internal defibrillator, has been zero. I'm not afraid of track in LQT1. Captive audience have to have the safety plan. I'm essentially not afraid of almost any sporting activity in a well-diagnosed, well-risk stratified, well-treated patient, where we spent a good amount of time with the athlete and his or her mother and father coming together to make sure that everybody is A-okay with their return to play. So a lot has happened, Mary. Is so different than what was done to children, adolescents, young adults 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, where they got the system shut down and the collateral damage has been extensive. We don't talk about it, we don't publish it, but all the dark side of kicking these kids out of the things they love to do. We stopped practicing that way at Mayo Clinic in the year 2000 when I joined the faculty, and slowly the rest of the world is starting to nod in approval or agreement that this way of doing this issue, shared decision making surrounding sports and activities and how now shall I live, what now can I do, is changing. So hopefully that will be encouraging for people out there. Sophie, I heard someone mention that you cannot eat or only eat a limited amount of chocolate when you have long QT. Can you elaborate? Yeah, that's fake news. Much to do about nothing. So there are individuals that have felt strongly that we should deliver cruel and unusual punishment and say no chocolate. No, and it's well intended. Why? Chocolate has caffeine. Oh, caffeine is sort of like adrenaline. Therefore, caffeine is bad for long QT. Therefore, chocolate is dangerous for long QT. No, not at all. I can tell you that my fear or concern about normal intake of chocolate, normal intake of caffeine, is basically zero. Zero. So go ahead and have your small Starbucks latte, Caribou, whatever brand. Do not go out there and have 5-Hour Energy, Monster, Red Bull, Celsius, highly caffeinated energy drinks are potentially QT dangerous, QT aggravating, CPVT triggering. So again, back to everything in moderation. But if you had your a little chocolate, Life is like a box of chocolates, I think was that Tom Hanks, great movie. Forrest Gump. So no fear, but that's the genesis of the no chocolate. So there's no more worry about chocolate. Great question about how common is it to have a prolonged QT interval after a sudden cardiac arrest? Does this mean you have long QT syndrome? No, it doesn't at all. In fact, one of the most common ways that long QT syndrome has gotten overdiagnosed, incorrectly diagnosed, is they come in as a cardiac arrest survivor. They're in the emergency department in the ICU as they're recovering. They get their first ever ECG. And that first ever ECG after cardiac arrest shows a long QT interval. And then they conclude, aha, I have the answer, long QT syndrome. Wrong. This could very easily be just a transient post-cardiac arrest reaction of the heart's electrical system to the stressor, not the cause of the cardiac arrest. Now, of course, if it stays prolonged and it doesn't normalize 3 days, 5 days, 2 weeks after that cardiac arrest, yes, this probably was the preceding triggering event and the root cause. But automatically, post-cardiac arrest QT prolongation by itself does not equal long QT syndrome. Could have been many other things for which that was a transient. The QT lengthening out was a transient reaction to the insult of the cardiac arrest in the first place. Cheryl, thank you, from New Jersey. Has a son, 5. That's awesome. Great age. And he has CPVT. Our cardiologist said he's too young for an ICD. When do you think is an age that he should have one? Well, that's a great question. And your cardiologist is absolutely right. He's too young. But having said that, if I thought he needed an ICD, not too young, we can install a defibrillator if we think we need it in an infant baby. So the size doesn't matter. It's the disease and the threat of the disease doing something that we don't think we can control with our other treatment strategies. Now, the beauty in CPVT is we should be using a defibrillator ICD less. In fact, Arthur Wilda led a study published in European Heart Journal now a couple years ago, where we looked at all CPVT cardiac arrest survivors, where that's how we learned they had CPVT. So they presented, declared themselves while undiagnosed and then untreated, obviously. And then afterwards, we looked at those sudden cardiac arrest survivors from CPVT who got treated with an installed defibrillator versus those who didn't have a defibrillator. And in comparing those two groups, there was no survival benefit in the owners of an internal defibrillator. So in other words, the defibrillator did not add life-saving protection. It only brought device-related complications as a possible outcome. Now, do I have CPVT patients with internal defibrillators? I do. Not very many. And those who do cardiac arrest, even though we think we can come up with a non-ICD solution, we sometimes still will add the defibrillator if that's what mom, dad, patient, and all of us together are thinking is perhaps in the best interest. But I would not be thinking that your son, age 5, just because he has CPVT, is going to need to get a defibrillator someday at some time. He may never need an ICD. Should someone always receive an ICD after a cardiac arrest? That's kind of similar to what we were talking about. Great question. And the answer is it depends. By guidelines throughout the world, if you did cardiac arrest, unless we knew exactly what the reason was, and that reason was completely reversible, and if you had at least 1 year of life predicted left, you would get a defibrillator almost everywhere. In other words, you're a sudden cardiac arrest survivor from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, ACM, long QT, Brugada, CPVT, doesn't matter the name of the disease, you get an internal defibrillator. But that's then, that was then, this is now. There's a couple of specific reasons why we might not need to use the ICD after that cardiac arrest. Type 1 long QT syndrome is one of those reasons, because we know that our LQT1 directed therapies are incredibly effective, protective. So it might have started with a cardiac arrest. What if it even started with an electronic gaming associated cardiac arrest during Minecraft or something? Would we have to install a defibrillator if we knew you were LQT1? We might not. And increasingly we aren't. What if that disease was then called CPVT, as I mentioned for Sophie, or for Cheryl rather, and it was CPVT that was the reason? Would we have to do a defibrillator as what's called after cardiac arrest secondary prevention? Many would, but we would not have to, by the emerging evidence that's coming along that would say, I could treat that CPVT patient with triple therapy: left cardiac sympathetic denervation, one-time surgery, nadolol beta blocker, and flecainide. And on that triple package post-cardiac arrest, the threat of a recurrent episode would be extraordinarily low. And so maybe in the future, there's going to be more and more reasons, names of diseases for which we would not automatically have to do the monopoly: do not pass go, do not collect $200, go straight to installing a defibrillator. We may have more and more diseases as we get better and better about treatments where that doesn't have to be the immediate and appropriate reflex after a cardiac arrest. These are just amazing questions. I didn't realize so many were coming below. So we're going to have plenty for the next round. You all do an incredible job with real-time questions. Megan's, would I recommend a sub-Q ICD or a traditional one for those that have type 1 long QT syndrome and have breakthrough cardiac events? Well, Megan, great question. First thing I would ask is that LQT1 person, if they're having breakthrough cardiac events, is that just on medication? If so, what beta blocker? Make sure we're on the right beta blocker, nadolol or propranolol. If on that right beta blocker, then why not denervation, left cardiac sympathetic denervation, one time instead of an installed defibrillator? Its protection is not cure in LQT1, but it's really good in LQT1. And then if I still thought my LQT1 person needed a defibrillator, we have all kinds of different ICD options. You mentioned sub-Q, the one that goes in the side and then around and up for the lead, nothing inside the heart. Very attractive idea. I'm not crazy about it yet, because I think the T waves of long QT people are so dynamic and changing that I'm concerned about an unacceptable higher rate of inappropriate shocks in my long QT patients. So not crazy about it, but I do have some with the sub-Q ICD. The standard ICD that you mentioned, the transvenous, where it goes here underneath the collarbone, and then the lead tunnels inside the vein and into the heart. We try more and more, harder and harder, not to install hardware in the heart. So we use that less. And then that brings an option that very few people ever talk about, is the epicardial ICD. It's the way we did an ICD if you had to do it in a baby, for example, where you tuck the generator under the rib cage, and then you attach the lead through small incisions here and in the left rib cage space. So you bring the lead and attach the lead to the back of the heart. So nothing's inside the heart. And that way you have perhaps hopefully better T-wave discrimination. It's a way that we've used for many of our collision sport athletes, for example, as a method to potentially protect the system even more. So I'm not even sure your patient who you're referring to, Megan, needs a defibrillator, but we have several options if that person did. Rachel's asking about, do we experience more problems with bad outcomes in dysautonomia people who need ICDs? Oh, that's an interesting question, Rachel. So I'm not quite sure if we're talking of patients who have a true genetic heart disease of the SADS conditions, long QT, Brugada, CPVT, ACM, so forth, and also have dysautonomias, or if we're talking about dysautonomias by themselves. Some patients who have genetic heart disease also have these dysautonomias. Some people hear them of vasovagal tendency, POTS, other expressions, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And they can coexist in people who also have genetic heart disease because that reflex tendency, if you will, is out there in the background. I don't really find that it causes any problems in patients who have defibrillators, though. So I don't think there's a mixing together that is unattractive. And then Cheryl added about that CPV cardiac arrest and did it 4 times before the diagnosis was made. Now that's incredible. Thank goodness somebody finally made the diagnosis. And in that setting, it really won't matter how confident that I might be or Arthur Wilda might be in configuring a treatment without the defibrillator. So I would imagine the defibrillator is going to then happen. And in my program here at Mayo Clinic, if we're going to commit a defibrillator to a CPVT patient, that patient is almost always also receiving triple therapy, the denervation surgery, the beta blocker, and the flecainide. And we believe and think we have reason to think that that will make the likelihood of the so-called electrical storm, where the defibrillator itself could contribute to the problem, very, very unlikely. So I think that scenario that you added probably doesn't matter what anybody thinks is going to get a defibrillator. If they're going to get a defibrillator, they must be on dual therapy, Nadolol and flecainide. And in our program, we offer the addition of the triple package of denervation, beta blocker, and flecainide. Ooh, 7 minutes on the counter. And here's from Anna, 31-year-old woman diagnosed with LQT2, beta blockers implanted with the SICD. I moved from Phoenix, Arizona, from Germany, and feel a lot more arrhythmias than I ever have. Could this be related to the desert heat? Great question. I doubt it. I've never been impressed with background arrhythmias, and the arrhythmias that you feel probably have nothing to do with your LQT2. Some people just have background ventricular ectopy, skip beats, extra beats, PVCs, premature ventricular contractions, and they may or may not have anything to do with the LQT2 substrate. They probably don't have anything to do. So I think it would be interesting to know what are those arrhythmias that you feel. I would be doing a Holter, for example, a 24-hour Holter, 48-hour Holter, to try to catch some of these, the arrhythmias or the perceived irregular beats that you have, and then go from there in figuring it out. But I don't think we can blame the desert heat for that. I just never have been impressed with an increased dissociation from that. Interesting, though. Beatrice, 12-year-old son, diagnosed with long QT syndrome on clinical grounds, it sounds like, because they're awaiting the genetic test, taking Nadolol 40 milligrams a day. That's a good dose for a 12-year-old, so good job. He's resumed playing soccer, plays at high levels. Congrats. That's fun. But it's very difficult to regain his previous physical condition. Is there anything you can do to get it back to his previous performance, obviously without taking risks? Live in Switzerland. Well, Beatrice, guess what? My wife and I might be coming to celebrate our 34th anniversary in Switzerland in December. 34? Yep, 34. And so we love Switzerland. Uh, that's a really good question. There's no doubt that a stiff dose of beta blocker for certain athletes, for certain positions, for certain sports, that they can feel it. They know the difference of what it's done to their motor, to their engine. And if they're not tolerating their beta blocker because of from what they conclude as unacceptable side effects, for example, if your son turns out to be LQT1, we would very comfortably in our program here at Mayo Clinic move towards one-time therapy with left cardiac sympathetic denervation as a way to lower the dose of Nadolol, because the denervation surgery does nothing to the engine, to the heart-lung machine. And that might allow us to either lower the dose of Nadolol or potentially go with one-time therapy, the denervation surgery, as the only active treatment. This is new territory. It's not standard by any means. It's new. But I think we're going to see this more and more for the right chosen, the correctly selected patient. And I currently follow about 100 patients with long QT syndrome where we've moved to one-time denervation therapy only. Almost all of those 100 is because they had a situation where have disease, it's mild, I hate the medicine. So obviously we would not trust one-time denervation therapy for, I have the disease, it's been really nasty to me, it's caused recurrent cardiac arrest, okay, just the denervation. No, it's not a cure. So, but when it's a trade for the lower risk person who's felt rotten, lousy every day of their life from I don't like the beta blocker to potentially a life free of beta blocker, almost all of our denervated patients, not all, almost all, have chosen that trade and would do that trade over and over again. So there may be options, and exploring it in Switzerland, would you go have the surgery in Italy by Dr. Peter Schwartz's denervation surgeon, for example? Would you potentially have the means to come to Mayo Clinic, where, as most know, we provide more of that specific therapy than anywhere in the world. Well, let's see. I think we've reached the top of the hour, and I almost got, I think there's 1, 2, 3, and I just don't think 4. Oh my. These are great questions, but I just can't do justice to it in this short, in the remaining time. But I am grateful. Andrew sort of new, and I love that you're new, and good to see your questions, and thank you for your comment. Great service that we're providing to our community. I really appreciate the time. Well, I really am grateful that you chose to spend the time with us. You are, and families like you all around the globe are why SADS Foundation is here. We are the largest nonprofit advocacy organization in the world devoted to your conditions, to conditions associated with SADS, sudden arrhythmic death syndromes. But really, our passion, our vision, our mission, our expectation is not the D part of SADS. It's stop SADS. So if you want to start thinking of it that way, we even made a website, the same website, www.stopsads.org, besides the parent site of www.sads.org, because the fear of death, the risk of death when we are well treated is really low. Are there tragic exceptions to that? Yes. Do we have more work to do? Of course. Can we get better? Yes, and we do need to, but it is so different in 2022 than when I first joined the faculty in the year 2000. What we do now in terms of empowering lives, letting them run their engine, letting them dream big, letting them be who they want to be, love to be, were created to be, are heading to be. We can do all of that. We try to make fear and anxiety a thing of the past. And as one of my long QT families, you can see it over there. She gave me that shirt, Faith Over Fear, and it still hangs there. And it probably will until I retire because I love it. And I'm thankful to that SADS member for wanting to remind me of that and help me remind you all that that's what we're trying to do, to help you as being a member of the SADS Foundation community to live and thrive despite your heart condition. We'll be together again in 2 weeks. Come join us, tell your friends, share this episode if you thought it was helpful and that the questions that were asked were good. They were, but if the answers were decent, I hope they were, and helpful. Spread them around, share them, tweet them, and so forth. See you in 2 weeks. I'm off soon. I've got one more meeting, but I will soon be heading down I-90 into the state of Wisconsin, the city of Madison, to see Jaden and Juniper. And oh yes, my son, Jager, his wife, Jordan, and our third son, who's living with them, Jens, also known as my Genzy Bear. Till next time, stay well, everyone. Blessings.